Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master. And in this one, we're going to be talking about Ben Reilly, who was the clone of Spider Man in the comics. And for a little while in the 90s, he took over for Spider Man in a big event they called the Clone Saga, which was extremely controversial at the time. Um, as far as its impact on our game went, this this one's going to be a little different than most of the videos I do because I don't actually remember us playing it out in the traditional sense. I feel like we just kind of talked about it out of game and kind of agreed like, yeah, this is our continuity, but we didn't actually play it. Um, and so what it was in the comics was at some point in the past, Spider-Man had been cloned, and he and the clone fought, and there was some confusion about who was the original. And so the readers had at that time been led to believe that the real deal won the fight and that the clone was subdued. Well, so then when Marvel did the Clone Saga in the 90s, what they led readers to believe at the time was the clone won the fight, and it was the clone who had married Mary Jane Watson, and in our game they had a daughter who is Spider Girl from those comics, which came out a few years after this. So the idea was for Peter and Mary Jane to kind of finally get their happily ever after. Peter didn't have to worry as much about the whole responsibility thing he's so famous for because now he's kind of off the hook, right? And the other one, who by the way, Ben comes from Uncle Ben, and Riley was, as I understand it, was Aunt May's maiden name. So that's where the name comes from. But yeah, the idea was Ben Riley was gonna take care of it. And I think on Marvel's end, they actually intended for this to be a jumping on point for new readers. And that's how it was for me. I had not been reading Spider-Man comics, and I would be hard pressed to kind of explain it now, honestly, because I do like Spider-Man now. And I liked Spider-Man when I was really little, and I don't know what happened between the two, but there was a period in those middle years where I just couldn't get into Spider-Man. And I think what changed it for me was actually back in the 90s on Fox Kids. They had the Spider-Man animated series. And I thought that show was really well done. And the more I watched it, the more I kind of got into it. And when I saw the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, I really got into that. Partially because when I was a kid and you'd watch the 80s Spider-Man stuff, because of how animation worked back then, the you would have like a matte painting of New York City, and then Spider-Man would swing through the frame where the background was not moving at all. You know what I mean? And I feel like Sam Raimi was very aware of that and flipped it around. So now we were following Spider-Man, where Spider-Man isn't actually doesn't seem to be moving, and he's kind of center of frame, and it's New York City that is sweeping by us, and we're getting this almost first person perspective kind of feeling of like, oh my God, this guy's jumping off of buildings and falling for a little bit before he even shoots a web. And so there's kind of a thrilling aspect of that I had not really picked up on before that, right? I just hadn't thought of it that way. So kudos to Sam Raimi for kind of giving me that on ramp to becoming a Spider-Man fan. Well, so I'm a little off topic. The point is, so I wasn't reading Spider-Man comics, right? And then anytime I tried to stick my toe in the water, and I feel like this is true of a lot of comic books, they've been around for so long and they have so much going on And so if they mention a character, and I'm going to be familiar with characters like Dr. Octopus or something like that because I saw him on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends or whatever. But if you mention a villain like Kane or something like that, I am far less familiar, right? So when I would pick up a comic book and I would see sort of like jargon or references to events I knew nothing about, that really kind of turned me off to reading the comics. So when we got the Ben Reilly Spider-Man, something that I personally really liked as a noob was there was none of that. They just kind of said, yeah, there was this other guy and he had been Spider-Man and just sort of forget about it. And now, if we're going to talk about Dr. Octopus, for instance, you know what? It's a brand new Dr. Octopus. And so you're learning about it for the first time, just like everybody else, right? And we're all here together at ground one, ground level, whatever, step one. So that part of it was really appealing to me, and I started to read the Spider-Man comics. I added them to my pull at the comic book store. So I actually liked Ben Reilly, but the thing is, I was kind of the only one because it felt that way anyways. Because um I think the majority of people already loved Spider-Man. They already knew everything about Spider-Man, right? And Marvel just comes along and takes everything that they loved and kind of like threw it in the trash, is I think how people felt then. The majority, nothing's ever unanimous hardly. So so I liked it. Most people didn't like it though. And then from my point of view in our role-playing game, and I mentioned this in the past, but I know not everybody has seen those videos. We use real time instead of comic book time, right? So for instance, um if Spider-Man is doing something and let's say, 1965 and now it's 1995 in the game, that means it's been 30 years since he did that thing. You know what I mean? And he's 30 years older. So, from that kind of a point of view, I was looking for an excuse to kind of retire Peter Parker. And it wasn't that I didn't want him to have not been the real deal, right? But it's more that in our game world, he wasn't getting any younger, right? And now he for sure had a daughter and and a wife and there I felt like he had other responsibilities, and so we used this actually as an excuse to retire him. We did give him his happily ever after. So a lot of people won't like that. I'm aware of that, but we just thought it was better than like a Spider-Man who is now 50 years old and he's still, whatever, punching Mysterio after all these years. We just weren't as into that. And we did it with some characters. We did it with Batman, for instance, but with Spider-Man, we used this as an out. And we were doing that a lot at the time. Anytime the comics did something that we saw it as an out for the character and something that kind of supported the real time idea, we went for it. So this was one of them. And we didn't say, yeah, Peter's the clone. In fact, I think we left it ambiguous. I think the way we handled it was we said, you know what, we think Peter and Ben would get along great, like an older brother, younger brother kind of a thing. They would just sort of shake hands and say, you know what, it doesn't matter who the clone is. We're both, sentient beings with feelings and stuff like that. And therefore, we are both real. We are valid and all that jazz. Let's just be family. That's how I handled it. And so Peter Parker was out, not in a bad way. We love Peter. I actually, because, and I mentioned this a lot, I'm a huge Transformers fan. When they did Transformers the movie, they replaced Optimus Prime with a new character named Rodimus Prime, and there are several episodes. I'm not trying to start a big fight with the Rodimus Prime fans, but there are several episodes in the series where he himself says he can't measure up to Optimus Prime, right? That those are big shoes to fill. And just generically speaking, I always found that to be kind of appealing, right? It's kind of like the opposite of a Mary Sue in a way. And so that was my take on Ben Reilly, was that Ben Reilly didn't think he was all that or anything. Um, but rather Peter had just knocked it out of the park and was like the greatest Spider-Man you could ever want. And now Ben Reilly was trying to live up to that, and it was hard. Um, so he would make cameos and adventures, and it was always something very brief. There for a while, for whatever reason, anytime a character went to New York City, I pretty much always would have him either run into Spider-Man or the Ninja Turtles. And sometimes I would have Spider-Man interacting with the Ninja Turtles themselves. And I just thought, it's New York, right? There's going to be all these famous people there. Surely they're going to bump into each other. And I love crossovers. So that was how we used the Ben Reilly character then. Um, and it was pretty cool. We never sat down though and were like, let's run a Ben Reilly campaign. We never did that. Um, like I say, he was more an NPC who would just kind of show up in other people's games. And even then, sometimes it was simple as somebody would be fighting a guy and losing, and Spider-Man would just sort of swing by and web the guy up for a second. And that would give the hero the chance he needed to land that knockout punch or whatever. And as Spider-Man swings off into the sunset, he gives you a kind of a little salute and he's gone. It was always just stuff like that. But I didn't want to get to this point in the timeline um, and not mention him. I do think it's kind of a landmark moment, not only for Ben Reilly starting up his adventuring career, but also as a send off to Peter. And these days, I love Peter Parker a lot, actually. I would argue that the most important part of a comic book character is their personality, right? It's not their powers. And for me, Peter Parker's personality is exactly what I want out of a comic book. Especially some of the old 70s Amazing Spider-Man issues. I'm reading through those right now and love them to death. Um, Death of Gwen Stacy and some of the John Jameson Man-Wolf type stuff. I feel like that's peak comics in my humble opinion. But yeah, so I love Peter and I get sad sometimes because kind of like this adventure showcases, I don't mind a hero retiring and getting his happily ever after, and some new guy now has to pick up that torch and carry it, right? I'm cool with that. Um, and so I feel like the elephant in the room with this concept then is Miles Morales. And I kind of don't like Miles Morales. And I haven't seen too much of him. And I know that there's just a million different writers and they're all telling a million different stories with a million different takes on the character. But I feel like every time I pick up an issue and Miles Morales opens his mouth, it's he's been kind of a jerk, and so that's not winning any points with me. And then I saw the I forget what it was called, the Spider-Man multiverse movie, the animated one. Um, and I felt like they were like I would build up Miles Morales on his own merits, and I would just do stuff to say, hey, look how likable this guy is, look how great he is, right? And it wouldn't come at the expense of another character. And I feel like that's become Marvel's crutch, is when they try to build up one person, they feel the need to cut down another. I don't like that. And so I feel like they did that in that movie where Spider-Man is now divorced. I can't remember if he was divorced from Mary Jane or she broke up with him or what was going on. He's like down on his luck. He's got the 5 o'clock shadow. I felt animation wise, the Miles character design is a more attractive design in terms of symmetry and shape relationships and stuff like that. I felt like Peter intentionally now looks kind of awkward and undesirable and that sort of thing. Um, so I did not like that movie nearly as much as everybody else seemed to, and that those are the reasons why. But yeah, I don't know. I guess you get it, right? I've kind of talked the idea to death. With Ben Reilly, we didn't say anything negative about Peter at all. It was quite the opposite. But but yeah, that was our take on it. Kind of a shorter video today, but I don't want to waste your time rambling on about stuff that's redundant. Um, Let me know in the comments section, what did you think of Ben Reilly? Were you reading comics back then? If so, did you like him? Did you hate him? I kind of feel like there's going to be a lot of people saying they hated him. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear about that. And as always, it would help out the channel if you guys took a moment of your time to smash that like button, check to see if you're still subscribed, all that jazz. And from everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.